Here's a number, 1,944. That's the violent crime rate per 100,000 residents in the most dangerous city on this list. The national average is 380, which means, in the wrong American zip code, you are 5 times more likely to become a statistic than the average person watching this video right now. Probably from a couch, in a neighborhood where the biggest threat after midnight is a raccoon in the trash. We're not talking about war zones. We're not talking about failed states or foreign headlines. We're talking about American towns, real addresses, places with high school football teams and church potlucks and local Facebook groups full of complaints about potholes. And underneath all of that, streets that their own residents refuse to drive through after dark. Not tourists, not outsiders. The people who live there. 12 towns. 12 sets of numbers that the Chamber of Commerce buried, the tourism boards pretend don't exist, and the locals navigate every single night like an unwritten survival manual passed down through the community. If you think you can handle number 1, smash that subscribe button right now, because I genuinely don't think you're ready. And if I'm wrong, prove it in the comments. Number 12, Saginaw, Michigan. Saginaw used to mean something. Back when General Motors was God and the Midwest was the economic spine of America, Saginaw was one of those places you moved to. Steady union wages, good schools, backyard barbecues with neighbors who'd known you since kindergarten. Norman Rockwell could have painted it. Then GM started shutting plants, and someone left, that Norman Rockwell painting out in 40 years of Michigan rain. Today, Saginaw sits with a violent crime rate of roughly 1,500 per 100,000 people, compared to the national average of around 380. Do the math on that. You are nearly 4 times more likely to be the victim of a violent crime in Saginaw than the average American city. The population has cratered from 98,000 at its peak to under 44,000 today, which means there's physically more empty space than occupied space in some neighborhoods. Abandoned houses don't just look eerie, they function as infrastructure for every variety of criminal enterprise you can imagine. Locals on Reddit describe certain East Side blocks as places where you don't stop at red lights after midnight, not as hyperbole. As genuine safety advice passed between residents like folk wisdom, the city has attempted numerous revitalization programs over the decades with the consistency of someone trying to bail out a sinking boat with a coffee mug. What makes Saginaw particularly heartbreaking, and this is the detail that'll stick with you, is that it still has the bones of a great American city. Beautiful old architecture, a river running through it, a population of people who, by and large, are just trying to survive the wreckage of decisions made in corporate boardrooms 3 states away. But survival in Saginaw after dark, that requires a very particular local knowledge that visitors simply don't have. If you think Saginaw's streets are unwelcoming, wait until you meet a city so small it only has 33,000 people, yet somehow racks up a body count that makes Chicago look timid. Number 11, Chester, Pennsylvania. Chester is 9 square miles of Pennsylvania, sitting right on the Delaware River, 20 minutes from Philadelphia's gleaming Center City skyline, and approximately a universe away from Philadelphia's tourist brochures. Population, around 33,000 people. Violent crime rate, consistently among the top 5 highest in the entire country per capita. Locals genuinely call it the jungle, not visitors, not journalists parachuting in for a poverty tourism piece. The people who grew up there, who love it, who refuse to leave their families behind. They call it the jungle. That tells you everything. The per capita murder rate in Chester has, in recent years, rivaled cities 10 times its size. We're talking about a municipality so overwhelmed that basic municipal services operate on a skeleton budget, while the city technically sits under state financial oversight because it's been fiscally distressed for decades. Chester has been in Pennsylvania's Distressed Municipalities program so long, it's basically a permanent resident. Here's the detail that really twists the knife. Chester was once a thriving industrial shipbuilding hub. The Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company employed tens of thousands during World War II. The city built warships. Now, it can barely keep the streetlights on. Drive through certain blocks on a Tuesday afternoon, and you'll notice an almost theatrical stillness. Vacant row houses with windows like hollow eyes. May corners where groups of young men stand with the specific body language of people who have absolutely nowhere else to be and no particular reason to trust strangers with dash cams. There's an anger in Chester that feels earned, because it is. The poverty rate hovers near 40%. The median household income is roughly half the Pennsylvania state average. And still, every few months, a local politician gives a press conference about turning things around. Chester residents have developed a healthy, deeply justified skepticism toward press conferences. Chester's got rage and history. But our next stop? It's got something Chester doesn't. It's been quietly violent for so long that the rest of the country simply forgot it existed. Number 10. Bessemer, Alabama. Imagine a city with a murder rate that regularly exceeds New Orleans. Now imagine that city has a population of under 25,000 people and sits in the suburban shadow of Birmingham, where most outsiders drive right past the exit without a second thought. That's Bessemer, Alabama, the city that violence built a permanent home, and while nobody was paying attention. The violent crime rate in Bessemer sits at roughly 5 to 6 times the national average depending on the year. 5 to 6 times. That's not a typo. Jefferson County's stepchild, Bessemer, operates as a separate municipality with its own court system, the Bessemer Cutoff, a geographic quirk of Alabama law that essentially gave the city its own judicial district. It sounds like a privilege. In practice, it has created generations of administrative isolation that left the city structurally unable to modernize its approach to public safety. What you notice driving through Bessemer's core isn't dramatic chaos. It's something quieter and more unsettling. It's the particular quality of exhaustion baked into the infrastructure. Gas stations with bulletproof plexiglass at the register. Businesses that close at 5 p.m., not because of market economics, but because nobody wants their employees in the parking lot after dark. Pawn shops thriving where hardware stores used to be. A former resident on a Birmingham area forum once described coming back to visit family as time travel to a place that time itself gave up on. That's harsh. It's also not entirely wrong. Bessemer has assets, proximity to Birmingham, highway access, and land, but assets without investment are just potential that rots in the sun. The people still there are tough in the way that only repeated disappointment manufactures. Tough and careful, particularly after dark, particularly in certain zip codes that even the local police respond to with a different frequency than others. Alabama's Shadow City is bad, but our next stop doesn't just have a bad reputation. It has a reputation so bad that the state of Illinois essentially pretends it belongs to Missouri. Number 9. East St. Louis, Illinois. East St. Louis exists as a kind of philosophical argument against urban planning, state governance, and the concept of municipal rescue operations. Sit down with that for a second. This is a city in Illinois that looks across the Mississippi River at St. Louis, Missouri, itself no stranger to this kind of list, and somehow manages to make St. Louis look like Zurich. The violent crime rate in East St. Louis has, at various points, been the highest in the nation. The population has collapsed from 82,000 in 1960 to somewhere around 17,000 today. And that number is almost certainly optimistic. There are entire city blocks that have returned, organically, to prairie. Nature is reclaiming East St. Louis the way nature reclaims things when humans simply stop showing up. Here's a statistic that will rewire your brain. The per capita income in East St. Louis hovers around $13,000 to $15,000 annually. The poverty rate exceeds 40%. The city's tax base is so decimated that basic services like road maintenance and park upkeep became aspirational rather than functional years ago. Illinois, a state not exactly famous for its own fiscal responsibility, has watched East St. Louis deteriorate for decades with the energy of someone watching a houseplant die on a windowsill across the room. Local legend says you can hear gunshots from the Illinois side while watching the St. Louis Arch glitter across the water. That's not legend, actually. Residents confirm it. You can literally see American prosperity's most recognizable monument while standing in one of American poverty's most documented zip codes. The symbolism is so heavy-handed, you'd reject it if a novelist put it in a book. Driving through East St. Louis after dark is something locals describe with a flat, matter-of-fact calm that's more unsettling than alarm would be. "You just don't," said one lifelong resident online. There's nothing to go to and everything to worry about. East St. Louis is the definition of forgotten, but our next stop was never remembered to begin with. Number 8. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Pine Bluff sits in the Arkansas Delta, with the particular melancholy of a place that peaked before anyone alive can remember its peak. Cotton was once king here. The White River runs nearby. There's Spanish moss. There's heat that arrives in May and doesn't leave until October. A wet, suffocating heat that feels like the air itself is angry at you. And then there's the crime rate. Pine Bluff's violent crime rate has repeatedly landed between 1,400 and 1,700 per 100,000 residents. For context, the FBI considers any rate above 400 to be high. Pine Bluff operates in a category that requires its own legend on the chart. The city has lost nearly half its population since 1980. There are more churches per capita than almost any comparable city in the South, which either says something beautiful about community resilience or something devastating about the fact that prayer has become the primary civic institution. Probably both. The economy lost its footing when manufacturing left and never fully found it again. The University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, anchors some hope, but a single HBCU cannot carry the weight of decades of disinvestment alone. What locals describe most consistently isn't a single dangerous neighborhood. It's a pervasive sense that danger is geographically unpredictable, that the rules other cities operate by don't quite apply here. A gas station that's perfectly fine at noon might be a situation at midnight. The same street, the same corner. All one former resident described Pine Bluff on a travel forum as a place where the people are some of the warmest you'll ever meet and some of the most dangerous, and you won't always know which is which until it matters. That's a sentence worth sitting with. Pine Bluff is Southern Gothic with a body count. But our next stop took an industrial city and turned it into something that only sounds like a metaphor. Number 7. Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown, Ohio is the city that the American mob loved so much they practically ran it. And when the mob left, they took the economy with them, but forgot to collect the crime. For decades, Youngstown was so thoroughly controlled by organized crime that locals called it Crime Town, USA. There was a period in the 1970s when car bombings happened with such regularity that residents described hearing one and simply turning back to their dinner. The steel mills closed. The mob wars ended. The city that once had 170,000 people now has fewer than 60,000, and that population loss is physically visible in a way that's genuinely surreal. Youngstown has demolished thousands of abandoned structures and still can't keep up. There are neighborhoods where you can stand in the middle of a residential block and count more vacant lots than houses. The city has developed an entire academic literature around itself. Urban planners study Youngstown as a case study in shrinking cities, which is the polite academic term for places that are quietly disappearing. The violent crime rate runs 3 to 4 times the national average. Certain neighborhoods, the South Side, parts of the East Side, are places where longtime residents navigate with a mental map of no-go zones, updated in real time through community Facebook groups and word of mouth. Shots fired on such and such street functions almost as a neighborhood news ticker, and yet, Youngstown has one of the most fiercely loyal local populations you'll encounter anywhere. That people who stayed genuinely chose to stay, and they'll defend their city with the specific passion of someone defending a complicated family member. They know the problems. They don't need outsiders to explain the problems. They just want someone to actually help solve them. Nobody has, not really, not yet. Youngstown had the mob. Our next stop has something scarier. It's in Illinois, it's flying under the national radar, and your aunt from Chicago has probably driven through it without knowing. Number 6. Rockford, Illinois. Rockford is Illinois' dirty secret. Chicago gets all the national media attention, all the hand-wringing op-eds, all the Tucker Carlson segments, all the "What Happened to This Great City" documentaries. Meanwhile, 2 hours north, Rockford sits quietly with a violent crime rate that has consistently ranked it among the most dangerous mid-sized cities in America, and the rest of Illinois basically pretends it doesn't exist at Thanksgiving. With a population around 145,000, Rockford is big enough to have real infrastructure, a regional airport, a legitimate downtown, a children's museum, and dangerous enough that significant portions of that infrastructure exist behind an invisible psychological boundary that residents understand and visitors don't. The east side of Rockford has zip codes where the violent crime rate runs 5 times the national average. 5 times. In a city that is, by most tourist maps, depicted as a quaint Midwest stop between Chicago and the Wisconsin Dells. The economic collapse followed the usual Midwest script. Manufacturing left, unemployment climbed, poverty concentrated, services deteriorated, crime filled the vacuum. Rockford's poverty rate hovers around 22%, nearly double the Illinois state average. The opioid crisis hit particularly hard here, layering pharmaceutical tragedy on top of existing structural wounds. What's interesting about Rockford, and this is the detail that separates it from the more infamous entries on this list, is that it has genuine momentum in parts of its downtown. Breweries opened, murals went up. All young professionals made calculated bets on cheap real estate. The paradox of Rockford is that you can have a genuinely lovely Saturday afternoon downtown and then take one wrong turn driving home and land in a neighborhood that operates by entirely different rules. The locals know the seam between those two Rockfords. Visitors rarely do. Rockford hides its danger behind Midwestern politeness. Our next stop doesn't bother hiding anything. Number 5, Monroe, Louisiana. Monroe, Louisiana is where the bayou meets the Bible Belt meets a violent crime rate that will make your palms sweat. This is a city of about 46,000 people in the northeastern corner of Louisiana, home to 2 universities, a minor league baseball team, a stretch of the Ouachita River that's genuinely beautiful at golden hour, and a per capita violent crime rate that consistently places it in the top 5 most dangerous cities in the United States. The murder rate in Monroe has, in recent years, exceeded 50 per 100,000 residents. The national average is approximately 6. Let that arithmetic rearrange your brain chemistry for a moment. Louisiana, as a state, is no stranger to violent crime. It regularly leads the nation in murder rate per capita. But Monroe achieves something extraordinary even within that context. It is, in the specific vocabulary of crime statistics, an outlier within an outlier. The poverty rate exceeds 30%. Unemployment runs high. And the geography of danger in Monroe is hyper-local. Certain streets, certain neighborhoods, certain hours. Mapped in the collective memory of residents with the precision of a survival manual. There's a particular quality to nighttime Monroe that visitors sometimes describe as beautiful and ominous in the same breath. The air is thick and warm, smelling of river water, and something indistinct and organic. The Spanish moss moves. The cicadas are absolutely deranged in their volume, and somewhere in that sensory richness, there are zip codes where strangers in slow-moving cars at 2 a.m. are treated with an extremely well-earned suspicion. Locals describe a kind of hypervigilance that becomes second nature, the constant low-level awareness of where you are, who's around, what's parked where. It's the exhausting cognitive tax that high-crime environments impose on the people who can't simply leave them. Monroe is Louisiana's overlooked catastrophe, but our next stop is so famous for danger that it once abolished its own police force and somehow got even worse. Number 4, Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is the cautionary tale that other cautionary tales use as a cautionary tale. In 2013, the city made the almost incomprehensible decision to dissolve its entire municipal police force. The whole thing gone, replacing it with a county-run department. The rationale was fiscal and operational. The optics were, to put it charitably, not great for a city already drowning in crime statistics. At the time of disbanding, Camden's murder rate was roughly 10 times the national average. The city of approximately 74,000 people had fewer than 250 officers for a place that desperately needed 3 times that number. Entire neighborhoods had functionally been ceded to open-air drug markets. A reporter from Philadelphia Magazine famously described driving through certain Camden blocks and seeing the kind of activity you only see in documentaries about places you never want to go. The county takeover brought genuine changes, more officers, different community policing strategies, a measurable drop in certain crime categories. The story of Camden's post-2013 trajectory is genuinely complicated, genuinely contested, and genuinely more hopeful than the decade before it. Urban scholars debate it constantly. But here's what didn't change: the poverty. The median household income in Camden remains among the lowest in New Jersey, a state with a sky-high cost of living. The unemployment rate stays elevated. The population continues its slow bleed as anyone with economic mobility finds an exit. In uncertain neighborhoods, particularly in the north and east, retain a reputation that no amount of county police restructuring has fully dissolved. Real estate investors have circled Camden for years, drawn by proximity to Philadelphia and river access. Gentrification is beginning its familiar creep along certain corridors, which raises a whole separate set of uncomfortable questions that this video doesn't have time to fully unpack, but trust that the longtime residents are unpacking them loudly and constantly. Camden reinvented its police force and is still on this list. Our next stop invented something more permanent: an American mythology of ruin. Number 3. Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana is the most photogenic apocalypse in America, which is either a backhanded compliment or a profound indictment of how America treats its industrial cities, depending on your mood. Abandoned buildings from Gary's glory days, the City Methodist Church, the Genesis Convention Center, block after block of Art Deco commercial architecture, have become pilgrimage sites for urban explorers from around the world. People fly internationally to take photographs of Gary's decay. The city is genuinely, hauntingly beautiful in the way that ruins are always beautiful. And it is genuinely, consistently, statistically very dangerous. Gary was built by U.S. Steel in 1906, literally constructed from scratch to house steelworkers. And at its peak in 1960, it held 178,000 people and a confident industrial future. Even today, fewer than 70,000 people, one of the highest murder rates in the country, a poverty rate exceeding 35%, and a population of abandoned structures that the city estimates in the thousands. The violent crime rate in Gary runs approximately 4 to 5 times the national average. The specific geography of danger follows the bones of the city's collapse. Neighborhoods that emptied out first are the most compromised now. Certain streets on the west side or south side, after dark, operate in a social physics that has very little to do with the legal infrastructure supposedly governing the place. Michael Jackson grew up in Gary. He got famous, got rich, and left Gary in the rear view as fast as the physics of fame allowed him. That's not a criticism. It's a data point. Even one of the most successful human beings in entertainment history looked at Gary and said, "I love where I'm from, and I'm not staying." The people still there, many of whom have stayed by necessity rather than choice, navigate a city that requires constant awareness, constant calculation, constant knowledge of which blocks are passable and which are not, and at what hours. Gary is ruins with a heartbeat. But our number 2? It's a city the whole world watched suffer and still couldn't save. Number 2, Flint, Michigan. You already know Flint's water story: lead pipes, contaminated water supply, children with elevated blood lead levels, a public health catastrophe so severe and so preventable that it became shorthand in political discourse for governmental failure at every level: local, state, federal. You've seen the documentaries, you've heard the outrage. What you may not know is what Flint looked like before the water crisis made it famous, and what it looks like now that the cameras have mostly moved on. Because Flint's water story, as devastating as it is, sits on top of a foundation of economic collapse and violent crime that predates the contamination by decades. Flint's violent crime rate runs 4 to 5 times the national average. The poverty rate is around 40%. The population has fallen from a peak of nearly 200,000 to around 80,000 today, a loss so dramatic that Flint has, like Youngstown and Gary, been used as an academic model for urban decline. Whole neighborhoods have been functionally abandoned. The city has demolished thousands of structures and cannot build meaningful replacement activity fast enough to fill the void. After the water crisis, after the settlements, after the infrastructure promises, residents describe a particular flavor of cynicism that's different from the average struggling city's cynicism. It's the cynicism of people who were promised help, who watched the world pay attention, and who then watched the attention evaporate. Some water infrastructure has been replaced. The poverty and crime did not get replaced with anything. And certain areas of Flint after dark function under the same unwritten local rules you've heard described across this entire list. Don't stop unnecessarily. Know which routes you're taking. Know what the body language of trouble looks like before trouble announces itself. The people of Flint are not defeated, but they are, by every reasonable measure, deeply exhausted. Flint survived its water crisis in the national spotlight. Our #1 city survives something worse, every single night. And it does it to a soundtrack of the most beautiful, heartbreaking music America ever produced. #1, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is #1 on this list, the way it's #1 on most of these lists, comprehensively, consistently, and by a margin that makes you stop scrolling and reread the statistics. The FBI's Uniform Crime Report has placed Memphis among the most dangerous large cities in America for years running. Violent crime rate approaching 2,000 per 100,000 residents. A murder rate that, in recent years, has topped 300 homicides annually in a city of roughly 630,000 people. And a property crime rate so staggering, it operates almost as ambient background noise. Memphis has more violent crime per capita than Chicago, which is the city America chose to make the symbol of urban violence. Let that land. The geography of danger in Memphis is not subtle. Locals have a phrase, the 456, referring to the 38104, 38105, and 38106 zip codes on the south side, where certain blocks register crime rates that statistical models struggle to contextualize. But even outside those specific zones, a kind of pervasive wariness shapes how Memphians move through their city. You lock your doors at red lights. You are aware of who's approaching your car. You don't sit in your driveway with your windows down at midnight regardless of which neighborhood you live in. And here is where Memphis breaks your heart in a way that none of the other cities on this list quite manages. Memphis is magnificent. The food, genuine Memphis barbecue, not the imitation served anywhere else on earth, is worth traveling across the country for. The music heritage is staggering. Blues, soul, rock, and roll. Any Sun Studio, Stax Records, Beale Street. The literal birthplace of multiple American musical genres. The Mississippi River here is wide and brown, an ancient feeling. The Civil Rights Museum sits in the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and it is one of the most important and emotionally devastating institutions in the United States. Memphis has a soul, pun intended, that you cannot manufacture and cannot find anywhere else. It also has a poverty rate approaching 25%. A public school system chronically underfunded, a political history of decisions that concentrated wealth in specific corridors while leaving vast swaths of the city to fend for themselves, and a crime rate that is, at this point, a humanitarian crisis dressed in statistics. And locals talk about Memphis with the complicated love of someone in a relationship they can't quit. "I know every terrible thing about this city," said one longtime resident in a Memphis subreddit thread, "and I would never leave." Meanwhile, drive through Orange Mound after midnight, drive through Binghamton or South Memphis. The emptiness at those hours is not peaceful. It's the emptiness of streets that people who know those streets have consciously, deliberately vacated. That decision, made by thousands of individuals independently every single night, is the most honest review a neighborhood can receive. Memphis is #1, not because it's hopeless. It's #1 because it contains, in concentrated form, every force this list has been examining. Deindustrialization, poverty concentration, underinvestment, the long tail of American racial inequality. And it plays them all out against a backdrop so beautiful, it makes the tragedy feel almost operatic. Almost, so there it is. 12 American towns where the locals themselves have drawn invisible lines on the map. Lines that no GPS will show you, no tourist app will warn you about. Lines learned through lived experience, through loss, through the particular education that comes from actually living somewhere the rest of America prefers not to think about. These aren't places to hate, they're places to understand. Because every city on this list was built by people with hope. And every city on this list is still occupied by people with hope. And the gap between that hope and the reality they're living in is the most urgent question in American civic life. Do drop in the comments. Which city shocked you the most? And if you think this list was intense, subscribe right now, because next time we're looking at 12 American ghost towns where people tried to stay, and something drove them out entirely. Whatever you're imagining, you're not imagining it dark enough.